Hi, welcome to Night Clerk Radio. This is episode 16. What is Muzakcore? Or should I say, what is Muzakcore? Because that's sort of what Muzak is a little bit. I don't know.
Muzak is Cool Rat?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. Yeah,
right.
I feel that's an insult to Cool Rat, but you know. And of course, with me is my co-host, Burke. How you doing, Burke?
I'm good. That's a hell of an inside joke from another podcast.
And an RPG supplement. Yeah, essentially. Yeah, Cool Rat is a fictional character I made up for a role-playing game book that I wrote years ago. He's basically Chuck E. Cheese, but on a skateboard. It was a whole thing. It's become a running gag on other podcasts. For those of you, for that Venn diagram that is not our PPR and Mix 6 listeners, thank you for listening.
But it totally works out because he is kind of mocking that ironic corporate, hey, cool kids.
Yeah.
Neon and cutout dash designs and shit. So it's thematic.
Yeah. So as you might guess, Muzakcore is sort of a take on Muzak, which is, elevator music and et cetera, et cetera. Burke, you pick this topic. So please share your thoughts on why this was your choice.
Yeah. This choice backfired because it actually turned out being really interesting. Yeah. So we've been doing these genre discussions, and I was like, well, what's a genre of vaporwave that we haven't covered, a subgenre we could dig into? Did we miss a big one, or there's just some weird niche one we can pick? And I came across this sort of Muzakcore cross office soft, it's sometimes also called, or like corporate wave. I consider those kind of all the same, which is to me like the ironic end game of mid 2010s vaporwave, where you come back around to creating like this really clean, sterile sound, kind of in counterpoint to vaporwave, which tends to be, that hazy, distorted reverb.
Dissonant.
Yeah, exactly. And that name comes from the inspiration of Muzak, which is like, I think of it as like dentist waiting room music, that sort of idea.
I tend to think of it as like being put on hold music.
Yeah.
Like,
that's really good. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, these are all things. This is like vaporwave is a niche genre, and there's sub niches within it, subgenres within that. And this is like a niche within a niche within a niche. Like, this is not like even really recognized as a subgenre of vaporwave by some people. If you look up vaporwave guides, there are all these giant JPEG guides to like, here's 10 albums in each of these genres you can listen to get a sense of this. This doesn't even show up on those. Like, not many people even recognize it. The tag on Bandcamp is woefully small. There's only a few dozen albums on there, which by Bandcamp standards is minuscule, like almost non-existent. But on the other hand, like the two albums we're talking about today are all listed on like, what are your must listen to albums? What are the most important vaporwave albums? These regularly come up in discussion quite a bit, and people have studied them in some ways for years. It's there, like it's part of the scene, but it's almost like the subconscious of the vaporwave scene in some ways.
Yeah, it's weird, and it is sort of in opposition, like I said, aesthetically to a lot of other vaporwave in terms of being very clean and sterile and obvious. I think we were talking in preparing for this episode that's sort of interesting because the corporate side of the aesthetic is something you don't see as often, and it really works in opposition to sort of the consumerist nostalgia of a lot of other vaporwave like Mallsoft, because it's the other half of that cycle, right? So you have to like work to make money to spend down at the mall. So this is your experiences sitting in an office earning less than you produce for a company.
Muzak really is you could also call this subgenre MIDI wave, because if you were browsing the internet in the early days of the late 90s, early 2000s, the GeoCities era, tons of web pages had embedded MIDIs, and MIDIs are just very small files that can play music based on synthesized instruments. So you can have a full song and download very quickly, and that's kind of what this is going for. And they're very mechanically precise in a way that real music isn't. For me, it embodies sort of the virtues of corporate culture, being positive, unconnected to anything in any sense of history or culture or place. It's removing anything that could be outside of the office place.
It's devoid of emotion, right? Like I will, for the third time, just say sterile. right?
Yeah.
Like there's nothing.
Well, there
there's
is
nothing to it
emotion.
that's inoffensive. I don't know.
The emotion is teamwork and enthusiasm for being a productive member of the workplace. Big smiles, power of positive thinking. I think, yeah.
But those aren't real emotions, right? So maybe no sincere emotions.
Yeah, no sincere. Yeah. All right, I'll give you that. Like, I mean, it's part of this culture that corporations really promote, which is just think about work and being part of the team members and successful and blending your synergies with your paradigms and don't think of anything else. Some would call this sort of like indoctrination or brainwashing or propaganda. But they're just saying like, well, if you think positive, you will succeed. If you fail, that's because you weren't thinking positive enough.
Yeah.
What I think of it is, back in the Cold War, the CIA and, American intelligence agencies promoted abstract expressionism in art and the Iowa workshop model in literature and fiction, which is the interior to fight against the social realism of the Soviet model of art and fiction, not to critique society, not to critique culture. And music is sort of the audio version of this sort of abstract art, visual aesthetic. If you look at a lot of this art, especially in the late 90s, it's like very early computer abstract models. Like here's a cube on an ocean wave or something like that. The math textbook cover style of art. And that's really popular because it doesn't remind you of anything that's ever existed before or possibly can comment on what your own life is like. It's just pretty pictures to look at. That's what they want you to think. That's the idea, because you gotta keep working and don't unionize. Whatever you do, don't unionize.
Got to keep productive. Always produce. No thoughts, only profits.
So yeah, music is the music of being on hold, of waiting rooms, PowerPoint presentations, and elevators, and it's boredom. It's waiting. It's mindless drudgery. For an optimist, maybe it's a lifeline. It's the kitten on a branch telling you to hang in there. For the pessimist or the realist, it's a warning. You're here forever. Don't bother acting up. It's just going to be easier if you submit. Don't bother to resist. That's kind of what I think about it. I did see this comment on a discussion of one of these albums. The satire is rich in this one, kind of hard to explain, but it's so fantastically vapid that it's unnerving. 10 out of 10 would stare into the void again. If you think about it, this is the most hardcore genre of music you can imagine. Like, this is more brutal than any metal. This is more nihilistic than any noise. If you can listen to this is the reality of the world we live in, just pummeling you in the face forever. Like, what is 9 Inch Nails compared to this?
God, that is an amazing quote.
Yeah.
That is perfect. Yeah. I mean, these are the corporate 9 to 5 of music, like totally by intent. And I think once we get into the albums, I think there's a lot of specifics in each album you can kind of point to and how that manifests. But it's so interesting, especially the tonal shift going from like dark ambient and dark jazz, post-rock stuff, just the absolute grimy underside of what we cover. It's just really interesting. Like, I wish it was as big as Mallsoft in some way, because I think it's an interesting opposition to Mallsoft.
Well, I mean, like Mallsoft, like a lot of Vaporwave is like the conflict between anxiety and comfort. And like Mallsoft is obviously more on the comfort side because of the haziness of it, the sort of field recording soundscape aspect of this. What I find is the people who find this pleasant to listen to, like people who have transcended reality in some ways to just like, like that's the galaxy brain take, right?
Yeah, I guess now I'm trying to figure out where I am on this, because I liked parts of like legitimately.
Yeah, no, like I listened to these and I was like, I wasn't like hating it. Like I'm not that decadent. There's sort of bangers.
I do like the anxiety comfort dichotomy, bringing that back. Yeah, because working is the anxiety side of that. Like it's the necessary side to engage in retail therapy.
Yeah, and I guess is it cathartic to really face that head on? Is it to listen to this on your own time? Are you so jaded now that this is the only thing that can give you some sort of sense of musical catharsis to listen to this? Compare this to like lo-fi music. Lo-fi music is the coffee shop of music. It's definitely trying to be comforting without being obtrusive and stuff like that. And it's still trying to be kind of cool, trying to make you forget about work and that kind of stuff. And this is just like head on. This is just like, again, staring into the void.
Yeah.
And some people, that's the only way they can feel anything anymore.
Oh, no.
I don't know. Like as an occasional thing, like I would definitely mix some of this into Vaporwave mixes. Yeah, I don't think I would listen to like these albums back to back to back. That might be a little much.
I mean, I did that many times in preparing for this, but I do think we could talk about more specifics, but I do think the albums you picked were more unnerving for me, maybe because I always listen to mine and then yours when preparing for this episode, but also yours are, which people hear in the samples, are way closer to like pure MIDI than the album I picked. Mine is at least a little bit more like, it's still, you know, stereo electronica, like really clean synths and stuff, but yours is like literally MIDI. Like
yeah, no, it is. So let's get into the albums then.
Yeah, I actually think most of what I want to say in context of the music. So let's get to it.
All right, so we're back, and that was Loading from Home by Prism Corp Virtual Enterprises, better known as Vectroid, one of the most prolific vaporwave artists out there. She is better known as Macintosh Plus, who did Floral Shop. You know the one. She is a pioneer. She has made many albums, and she released this and Clear Skies, which we'll also talk about, on the same day. So you can kind of treat this as a double album. There have been 3 different versions of this album. There's the original release, which is what I listened to, but there's also a cassette version that was released with an additional 6 tracks on it. Then there's a complete edition with the tracks rearranged, and I think it added another track to that. The cassette version you can listen to on YouTube, but you cannot just like legally buy this album anymore. You have to kind of hunt it down because she split from her original label, Beer on the Rug. And I have not looked into why yet, but she has the album up on her Bandcamp page to stream, but you can't like download it. I did like listening to this album. It was just like, haha, you know, it reminded me of, yeah, just that. There's this whole office genre of like the office place being hell, or, you know, a battlefield, or just a place of bloodshed and chaos. And this kind of reminded me of that kind of genre. It's pure MIDI wave. It's all MIDI waves. Yeah, pretty much all of these songs, especially on Home, are covers of other songs. So this is a cover album, but there's some things that Vectroid does. She pitch shifts some things. She changes the arrangement on other things, removes vocals in another one. But yeah, what do you think, Burke?
Yeah, so this track Loading and the album in general are kind of the 2 things that I was talking about coming out of the first segment. First of all, MIDI as fuck. And like, this is sort of what I talk about when I say no emotion. And I mean that in performances, right? Because even a human like playing a synth keyboard, there's still some notion of like humanity in that. Like there's like little things that are,
well, there's little variations. Humans can't hit the keys exactly like MIDI's. You're basically programming a computer to play this note, then this note, then this note at these intervals, and so it'll do it mathematically precise.
Everything is on the grid, both in time, so like rhythm and pitch, and in a way that's way more strict than even like modern pop music that's very quantized in both pitch and rhythm. So it's very just that straightforward, like this is a computer playing you this music, that feel. I think you capture that in lots of songs. The other thing, which you said this covers, but a lot of what they cover are rooted in like Latin jazz vibes. Like there's a lot of different like Latin clave patterns in a lot of this. There's a lot of like bossa nova and samba and that type of stuff as the percussion root. And I think that goes back to an interesting thing, that a lot of that music has been turned into like generic pastiche music by us. It reminds me a lot of something we've talked about, maybe not on this podcast, but Adam Neely's Girl from Ipanema video, which takes how the song Girl from Ipanema, which when it was written was like a really interesting mesh of the jazz and the Latin percussion culture that was in Brazil at the time. And then 30 years of like shticky covers just turned it into generic music. And that's why like it becomes like the meme for music. And that's interesting in this album, that you hear a lot of the same styles, because we did sort of in the 70s turn that music. We kind of gentrified it down into something digestible.
Gentrification of music. Yeah, boy. Yeah, there's this interesting discussion to be had about like easy listening, like what the gentrification of those genres, or this sort of like commodification of easy listening into like music. And this is certainly sort of a commentary on that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not criticizing, Vectroid for doing that. Because
she's obviously
the right choice to make corporate music is that aesthetic, but it's interesting to talk about like why that became.
Yeah, obviously Vectroid is satirizing it and sort of like just all the corporate buzzwords, Prism Corp, virtual enterprises. The song titles are all great, impressions loading, Neo Spa and Salon, Webscapes, e-cruising, inventory.
Millennium Cinemas.
Yeah, they all sound like, it's just like, it's gated communities and like strip malls, where I'm going down to Millennium Cinemas by the Palisades. Lifestyles. Oh boy, that's a big corporate word. What she chooses to cover is quite easy. There's like 80s pop music. They have a MIDI version of Easy Lover from Phil Collins. The loading is a cover of Bossa Nova S711 from Yamaha PSR 730. So it's like, keyboards have demo songs on them. Like Vectroid loves those. And she got a bunch of different keyboard demo songs and just used them as covers. The 1988 Winter Olympics, a song from David Foster. Video game songs from like Killer Instinct, among others. Cole Porter.
Okay.
What?
Just some of it sounded familiar and I couldn't place it. It might actually be Killer Instinct.
Yeah. Let's see here. Webscapes is actually TJ Combo's theme from Killer Instinct Gold.
Okay. That's one of the songs that I wanted to talk about, but for like different reasons.
Okay.
I also, when you said keyboard demos, a lot of memories flooded back. I had a little Casio keyboard when I was like 8, and it had a MIDI version of the song Venus by the 80s group, Bananarama, sorry, which I thought was like the coolest shit ever because it was just like this upbeat MIDI, and I'd never heard the original song. I just thought it was like the coolest fucking track ever, and I just listened to it all the time off my little Casio keyboard. Aw, I know. Back to Webscapes, though. What's interesting to me, and I'd have to listen to the original to see, but this track, I think it's like kind of some of the syncopation and it gave me like really early 90s hip hop kind of vibes, which is interesting because TJ Combo is like a black boxer. He's kind of like a Balrog type character, but it also got me thinking back to gentrification of music. Because that early 90s hip hop beat is also something that got really obliterated in the 90s, where they just took all the social consciousness and any of the commentary out of hip hop and just turned it into like everything is terrible video, everyone can rap, where you just have like that generic beat and just tons and tons of boring white people just being like, my name is political candidate and I'm here to say a vote for me is a vote for the American way, like that type of stuff, just like all of that nonsense. So I think it's interesting that that's another example of music genres also kind of being this gentrified stolen culture.
Oh yeah 100% is. Let me play a second sample, which is going back to keyboards. Newsgroup. Newsgroup is J-Cycle by Roland Corporation, another keyboard company. So it's somewhere on some keyboard somewhere. I just like that one. It definitely stood out to me among the others as being more pleasant to listen to.
Yeah, it's got a lot more going on than a lot of other tracks. This one also stood out to me, and I think I made a note that it's my favorite track off Home, actually. And I think it's because it has like that really, which makes sense given the time, because it's a rolling keyboard thing, that really like 80s a beat fusion kind of sound. It sounds like a weather report song.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
much more active drums, like more interesting, even though it's, I think also maybe it was like a tech demo thing, but it does have more pitch intonation. It has like bends and stuff. So it might've been like a keyboard that was one of the first ones that had the little pitch bending knob on it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Like, wheel, wheel, wheel.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Vaporwave does do a little pitch shifting and some other tricks on this album. They aren't straight covers, at least all of them. Like I listened to the TJ combo. I actually found it from Killer Instinct Gold and listened to it and compared it. And there are some differences to it. Another source that she uses, as we mentioned, was GeoCities. And let's see here, track 13 inventory is actually reggae from the GeoCities MIDI library. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So GeoCities, if you were to where it was this place where you could register and set up your own free website. And this was back in the late 90s. The web was a much more primitive place. So web pages looked very different than today's web pages.
Web 1.0.
Yep. And people were very eager to add little bells and whistles, literally bells and whistles, because you can embed music through a MIDI. And GeoCities had their own MIDI library. So you could just add free MIDI music. And a lot of people did. And sometimes you wouldn't see a player to pause the music. So it just anytime you loaded up that web page, it would just be looping some MIDI song forever. And Vectoroid really captured it with this. But like I mentioned, this is a double album. I consider a double album because she released these on the same day, April 20th. Hey, 420. 2013. And the other album, Clear Skies, let's play a sample from that. Animation studio from Clear Skies, which is Animate One Yamaha 96, which is from the Yamaha XG MIDI library. So almost all of these are from the Yamaha MIDI library. So these are all just covers of demo songs from Yamaha keyboards. It's not quite as varied or as interesting, I think, as Home, but I just kind of wanted to mention that. Again, staring into the abyss, or listening to the abyss. This is what the abyss sounds like to me. It's just MIDI keyboard demos.
Boy, I hope no one out there worked at like Guitar Center in the mid 80s and we're just flooding them with memories.
No. Yeah. So I kind of want to mention that, but we could go back to Home if there's anything else you want to mention. But I found this album certainly enjoyable to sort of listen to a few times. I don't know if I would have this on as background writing music or anything, but like putting a couple of these tracks in big Vaporwave mixes, just a little MIDI spice to sharpen the contrast between it and the haziness of a lot of other Vaporwave creates an interesting contrast. Kind of makes you think about like what music is in society. And you got to know there's a lot of people who unironically love music because they love business and being productive, and it's entirely surface level and shallow. And like, who are those people? They're among you. You don't even know.
Oh no, this can be your litmus test.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. I generally agree. So I think the most interesting part about really kind of both these albums, I think more so this one because it's more obvious. And I think maybe you did a little more research into your album than I did into mine. But I think just the music archaeology into it, where this stuff comes from, how does that feel? Some interesting piece of satire covering just another bit of commentary that other genres of Vaporwave don't.
Oh, yeah. I should mention that there's some people on the Vaporwave scene, like on the Vaporwave subreddit, who have spent maybe years actually carefully looking for the sources of all these songs on these two albums. If you search for these album titles in the Vaporwave subreddit, you can find these posts where like, hey guys, I've sourced this. Does anybody want to help? I've already figured out this many tracks. Like these albums have gathered enough interest and attention from the Vaporwave scene that people are like trying to document it, which I find fascinating. And both these albums do have Wikipedia entries, so they're very notable.
Interesting.
Just pure unadulterated MIDI goodness. If you want that, I mean, can't get any better than this.
Track was International Marketing Strategies, track 5 off our second album, Corporate Mixtape, a collaboration between Cat System Core, who we have talked about before in the Mallsoft episode. They're famous for Pall Mall Mars.
The first thing, anytime I think of Neko Core, Cat Core, is they did a collab album, ambient vaporwave album based on Half-Life.
Nice. The
Half-Life soundtrack, a Black Mesa research facility.
Fuck yeah. Oh my God. I'm checking that out.
With Mezzaluna. I love that album, but.
Nice. The Telepath one is Building a Better World.
Oh yeah. I like that album.
Which is also really good. So really great collaboration albums. The other person on this goes by Donovan Hikaru, who really is deep into this corporate aesthetic, much in the same way that Transworld Airlines has like this airline aesthetic and all they do. Donovan kind of has this corporate aesthetic and all they do. So their profile picture on everything is, I believe, a stock photo of a business person. If it's not a stock photo, Donovan's very handsome and very photogenic, but I'm pretty sure it's a stock photo. But they have other albums that are like Business Travel Bonanza, Corporate Parasailing, and my favorite, Free Market Foreplay. And all of these album descriptions, particularly Free Market Foreplay, has these in the album description slot on Bandcamp are just these long multi-paragraph defenses of like just rambling about like how great free market capitalism is and like the structure of the corporation's like perfect for maximizing efficiency, like all of that sort of talk, you know? So this album sounds very different initially than Home and Clear Skies. In a lot of ways that we can talk about. So first of all, it hits you hard with the meta irony, where the first track is just called Donovan Listens to Cat System Core, and it's just 30 seconds of him listening to a Cat System Core song while typing.
Yeah. There's literally like the field recording, like typing office sounds. Like, yeah, I like that.
And then it goes into this long streak of what we were talking about is this positive thinking. So there's a lot of tracks that sound like both musically and in their titles that you're at a corporate seminar. So some are just called Outdoor Seminar, or the one we listen to, International Marketing Strategies, Inspire. And they have clips, which I don't know what they're from. I didn't look at who sampled it. I'm sorry, but they're just these generic motivational speaking talks like, if you just think good, you do good. Like that type of stuff. It reminded me a lot of, I was thinking a lot about that George Clooney movie, Up in the Air, you know, what's in your bag?
Yeah.
That sort of hollow, motivational speaking.
Yeah. I mean, that stuff never ends too. Like it's just, there's always permutations. Like today I saw links on agile business strategy, and it's
the like, software development method.
Yeah. Like business agility, go to do epic coordination to enabler back to epic with lean budgets and guardrails for your portfolio vision. You know, let's have a scrum, you know, to deal with our product owners and team backlogs. And it's just like, oh my God.
What's interesting about a lot of these tracks musically, in addition to that, which is absolutely true, like I've had to deal with agile stuff in kind of moving from academia to industry. Like it's just a thing people want you to know. But one thing that's interesting about these is, and maybe they are covers and I just can't place the songs, but they sound to me like other common Muzak songs. So I worked retail for a long time in the mid 2000s, just, you know, go to college and stuff. And retail music in shopping malls is always generic, inoffensive pop. Or like older pop, classic rock stuff that no one's going to complain about, right? It doesn't really say much. And a lot of these songs sounded like that music to me, but like either turned into instrumentals or just covered in spirit. So track 2, Kevin Caraway Investment Model, has like this upbeat bass that just sounds like a faster version of a Cure song. Yeah.
It's very peppy, but yeah.
It's that same progression. It reminds me of, like Friday I'm in Love or something, like, but like faster. Auto Vandazak, which is the third track. These are great titles. Sounds to me, for some reason, I kept thinking of like a Sheryl Crow or like Pink Empowerment song, because they always play that type of stuff mixed into that. I've heard so many of those Pink songs when I was working retail, or like Robert Palmer. There's some that sound like ZZ Top, or just generic like bland blues rock that, you know, like, oh, it sounds heavy because it's distorted guitars, but it's not. It's just super plain. So that's like an interesting musical tactic through a lot of these, and sort of recreating that environment for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of music is also just sort of like, silence would be almost too subversive for these environments, because then you would have to be confronted with your own mortality. You'd have to think. This level of music sort of like takes up a couple of percentage of your brain's operating capacity. So it kind of like reduces your ability to, you know, have inner self-reflection. So it's definitely trying to just sort of occupy part of your brain and being lively enough to, like, you know, not just be white noise.
Mm-hmm.
I did notice there's a lot more variation. This is less MIDI wave than Home or Clear Skies. Yeah, with the live instrumentation. What track was it that had the really slapping bass? I think it was like 3 or 4. It was pretty early on in the album.
There's a couple. 2 has some bass. Financial Boogie, track 19, has a lot of bass. Yeah, a lot of the Donovan Hikaru songs do. They really like that synth bass, and do it really well. I think there's sort of 3 main modes to this album. So there's the first couple tracks, which I talk about being like seminar or self-help type stuff. But then starting track 8, even a little bit before, but really kind of track 8 through 11, there's a shift where they become much more like smooth R&B. So one is like Between the Spreadsheets. And it almost wants to have become like, okay, you're done with the seminar, and now here's kind of like your private life outside of the corporation. Yeah, you're hooking up with somebody you met at the conference, or internet shopping. You know, you're out doing your jam. So let me play an example of one of these. This song because it really stood out to me. It's this really interesting mix of like chimes and saxophone, and it's just so different from everything else that we've listened to for now. And I really think there's like this middle stretch of Between the Spreadsheets up through corporate power grid, or maybe even business innovation, that is sort of your private weekend. I don't know, like you're just chilling away from work.
Yeah, I see what you mean, but you know, for me, I think what really grabbed my interest was towards the end of it, like track 18, which is pure Japanese. We start getting vocals.
Yes.
And then like track 20 is very rock kind of focused. Almost like a rock karaoke, like somebody went to a karaoke bar and recorded someone
That's
singing.
The track I referred to as like ZZ Top, like bland blues rock.
Yeah. So like those were the ones that really stood out to me. But I mean, I can see what you see about that. The especially the wind chimes. But
it's just interesting that there's this mix of sort of real instrumentation, and it gets away from being quite so sterile. It does become a little bit hazier, a little bit smoother, a little bit more human. And then I do think that there is a transition back to being at work, because there's a track 13 from Cat System Corp called Outlook Pyramids.docx, which I'm going to play a sample from. And I picked this because it's the one track that stood out to me as being glitchy. It like skips and repeats itself. It's in that tradition, it's almost feels like broken focus, like you're trying to work, but you can't.
Yeah.
You know, you're staring at some document or some spreadsheet and your mind wanders to the pyramids of freedom. I don't know.
Yeah.
And then you like snap back to work.
Yeah. The facade is slips for a second, you know, everything is not okay for a second, but then it's all back. You know, this is about 4 or 5, you know, an hour or two before you can go home, and you're just like, time slows down to a crawl.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of this also shows sort of like there are differences in music. There are different types of music like there's very subtle differences, but like the type of song you would use for holding music is not the one you would use for a sales pitch. And it's not the same that you'd use for a corporate exercise versus like a video where you're trying to showcase how nice your hotel is or your conference center or whatever. There's different types of music. To the connoisseur, you know that each music has a very specific use in the corporate ecosystem. And this is kind of like showing, yeah, there is a lot of different types. You know, you kind of want like, oh yeah, sort of a manly rock music, you know, something that's supposed to be geared towards executives trying to, you know, get inspired and get motivated to go out there and earn and motivate their employees. So like a corporate, you know, executive exclusive weekend seminar or something like that. Before they go rock climbing, you know, as a team building exercise or something like that.
It reminds me of like that old meme video from the Windows 95 launch of all the Microsoft executives, Bill Gates included, dancing to Start Me Up by Rolling Stones. A trade show, and they're all like clapping off beat.
Oh God, yeah.
And like everybody's out of sync.
Yeah.
And
Weird.
they just have no idea what they should be doing up there.
Yeah.
But that's a good point about there being lots. Sorry for the topical whiplash, but I think that's a really good point about there being lots of different kinds of music, because I guess that is a unifying aspect of this mixtape. I was maybe trying too hard to divide it up into different kinds, because it does feel to me like there's segments to this album, but yeah, they all are ultimately hold music or piped into retail space music or piped into corporate party music. Any of those aspects fit, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's true. Another thing on this album that I just wanted to mention briefly that's interesting is there's a lot of tracks that have titles in foreign languages. So there's track 15, which is Hindi for Conquer the World. Track 18, which you talked about, is Japanese for If I Had Yen, and features vocals from a Prince song saying like, if I had money, she'd love me. She'd love me if I had the cash. And it's kind of like a play on If I Were a Rich Man from Fiddler on the Roof. It's like kind of Prince reprocessing that. Track 20, the ZZ Top song, is Chinese for Eurasian Success. 21 is Thai for Ticket to Success. And 22 is Korean for Friday Afternoon, which is also paired with the last track, Payday. So it's kind of like the end of your work week. So there is some theming, I think, in terms of a progression through this album. But I do think all these foreign titles, I sort of took them as like an allusion to like globalization.
Yeah. When you mentioned that in our earlier discussion, it's like, oh yeah, no, that's 100% it. Like, yeah.
Because that's sort of the modern form of colonization, right? Is like cultural hegemony and like export of corporate culture.
Yeah, no, it's sort of like there's a sci-fi novel I read a long time ago. I think it was Ringworld, where they talk about how in the future, when they have teleportation, they make all the little teleporting places look identical no matter where they are in the universe. So people have some continuity where no matter where they go, no matter how far out in the universe they go. I think it's the same thing. Like that's why airports all have the same style. It's entirely for the business person. They're trying to redesign, redevelop the entire planet to suit business people.
Totally. The first time I went to Japan with friends in the mid 2000s, one of the friends only wanted to like eat at chain restaurants because it was familiar. He was like scared. He's like in Tokyo. And he's like, I just want to go get a Big Mac. Come on, man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's a lot of people like that. This is part of, like I mentioned, the corporate ecosystem that is trying to like envelop the planet and is doing a hell of a job so far.
Yeah. If you find this on a golden record in 300 years, we really tried. We were against it.
But number must go up. Yeah, so like if this music makes you uncomfortable, well, maybe that's because you're uncomfortable with that. Again, I like tension and dissonance in my music, and this is an entirely different kind of dissonance than like audio technique. This is like cultural dissonance.
It's Marx's alienation. in music form.
Mm-hmm. Put that on the record cover.
That's your pull quote right there. Marxist alienation in sonic form. Yeah, versus I think the more like existential alienation of like dark ambient. I think that's a way that vaporwave and dark ambient are connected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they both deal with alienation, but in very different ways. Yep. And we're just being brave enough to admit that we are alienated.
Yeah.
That's the only difference between you and the non-vaporwave and dark ambient fans out there.
That's right.
You're all cowards.
Oh, no.
Unless you listen to this podcast, then you're a hero, really. Hero of music. Just, I don't know where I was going with that.
I'm into it. So I think final thoughts on this album. Again, the satire and the where stuff comes from and the context is ultimately the most interesting part. But I think for this one, compared to Home and Clear Skies, there's way more like just cool music I would just listen to. I think this is one I would feel way more comfortable putting on like a road trip playlist or something.
Oh, yeah. Like Vectoroid is almost like as too much. It's so pure.
She's too good at it.
Yeah, it's too much. I would slip in some of these songs on a vaporwave mix, especially as sort of like interstitials or like to cut between long hazy songs or something like that. Like they're a really good like way to whiplash people a little bit. The scary thing is if you listen to it and you start nodding along and you're like, oh yeah, oh my God, what's happened to me? Like, again, more brutal than any metal or noise album. So I don't know if I can take that level of attack on my own identity. What if I begin to like it too much? What does it say about me? So something to think about. Are you brave enough to listen to Muzakcore? Is the real question.
I know I am.
Well, thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this exploration of Muzakcore and hope we didn't bring up too many unpleasant memories of being in waiting rooms or on hold or in the office place. You know, it can be cathartic to confront your demons, even if they're mathematically precise MIDIs of reggae.midi from the GeoCities library. Speaking of horror, our next episode will be looking into the man, the myth, the legend, John Carpenter. His impact on horror movies and their music as a related thing, synthwave, and his own post-movie releases. He has released some albums after he stopped making movies.
Yeah, even independent of how much I love a lot of his films, especially kind of his like The Thing through Mouth of Madness kind of run, his music is really interesting and really great. So I'm really excited to talk about it.
Yeah. Lost Themes in particular, I'm eager. Can't wait to talk about that. It's a banger. Oh no, spoilers. But
oh no.
All right. Well, thank you for listening. We are at Night Clerk Radio on Twitter. I am at Ross Payton, and Burke is at Burke McBurkinson. Please rate and review us on your podcasting app of choice. Tell your friends, tell your family, shout it from the mountaintops, plug it in your PA systems at work, make everybody in the office place listen to that. We'll replace Muzak, just wall to wall, us talking about Vaporwave and other haunted music.
Hell yeah. That means I won the Vaporwave versus Dark Ambient fight.
Oh, no. Well, whatever. As long as it gets the podcast out there, I'll take it. Anyways, we'll talk to you all next time.